Listening section directions measures your ability to understand conversations and lectures in English. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. After each conversation or lecture, you will hear some questions about it. Answer all questions based on what the speakers state or imply. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. Most questions have 4 possible answers. In some questions, you will see this icon. This means that you will hear but not see part of the question. Some questions have special directions which appear in a gray box. Most questions are worth 1 point. If a question is worth more than 1 point, special directions will indicate how many points you can receive. You have approximately 40 minutes to complete the listening section. This includes the time for listening to the conversations and lectures and for answering the questions. To make this practice more like the real test, cover the questions and answers during each conversation and lecture. When you hear the first question, uncover the questions and answers. Questions 1 through 5 in a university housing office.
Hi, I live in Tower 1, and I'd kind of like to live in a smaller building. I'm thinking of moving next semester.
Do you know about the villages? They're on the other side of campus from the towers.
Uh-huh. I've seen them. From the outside. What's the rent like? Compared to the towers.
The rent depends on the situation, like how many people are in the suite.
Suite? What's that?
It's a unit for either 4, 6, or 8 people. They're like apartments.
Oh. Aren't there any private rooms?
No, not in the villages. It's all suites. The bedrooms are for 2 people. That part's kind of like in the dormitories. You have to share a bedroom with another student. The suites have 2 to 4 bedrooms, 1 or 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen with a stove, and a microwave and a full refrigerator. Some of them also have a big living room.
Oh, that sounds kind of nice. So, what's the rent like?
I've just been checking in the computer. It looks like there's going to be a couple of openings next semester, but there's also a waiting list with about 20-something people on it.
Oh.
Yeah. A lot of people want to live in the villages. I lived there for 2 years myself before I moved to a house off campus.
Uh-huh. So, what is the rent?
Oh, sorry. Okay. The buildings in Swanson Village all have 4-person suites. Those are $900 a semester.
Wow.
And the other villages, let me see, they're anywhere from $850 to $1,000. It depends. The 6- and 8-person units are usually a little less. The ones with living rooms are a little more.
Wow. That's more than I expected.
The cheaper ones are less than the dorms in the towers.
Yeah, but I was hoping it'd be a lot less. But still, I'd kind of like to get out of the towers. How do I get on the waiting list?
I can add your name now if you like.
Okay, it's Ian Jacobs.
Ian Jacobs. Okay, Ian, I've added you to the waiting list. What we'll do is send you a notice by email if something opens up in the villages. Your name is, number 27 on the list.
Number 27. Oh, wow.
You'd be surprised. Sometimes people change their minds, so people further down the list get a chance. You'll get in the villages eventually, maybe next semester.
Okay. Thanks for your help.
No problem. Have a nice day.
Number 1. What is the purpose of the conversation? Number 2. What are some features of the suites in the villages? Number 3. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Oh, that sounds kind of nice. So, what's the rent like?
I've just been checking in the computer. It looks like there's going to be a couple of openings next semester, but there's also a waiting list with about 20-something people on it.
Oh.
Yeah. A lot of people want to live in the villages. I lived there for 2 years myself before I moved to a house off campus.
Uh-huh. So, what is the rent?
Oh, sorry.
Why does the woman say this?
Oh, sorry.
Number 4. What does the man think of the cost of rent in the villages? Number 5. Listen again to part of the conversation. Then answer the question.
Ian Jacobs. Okay, Ian, I've added you to the waiting list. What we'll do is send you a notice by email if something opens up in the villages. Your name is, number 27 on the list.
Number 27. Oh, wow.
Select the sentence that best expresses how the man probably feels. Questions 6 through 10. Two students.
Our design class is getting really interesting, don't you think?
Yeah, I like Professor Vargas, but sometimes he goes too fast, and I feel like I'm missing something. There's a lot we have to remember.
True. There are a lot of details about all the different styles.
Yeah, there's Art Nouveau and Art Deco and Art Moderne. I have a hard time keeping it all straight.
I know what you mean.
For example, it seems to me that Art Deco and Art Moderne are the same thing.
Well, there is some overlap. They were both popular in the 1930s, although Art Deco came a little before Moderne. I think Professor Vargas said Art Deco started at an exhibition in Paris in 1925.
So they were about the same time. That's one thing that gets confusing. Another thing is, they seem so similar, it's hard to see why they're considered different styles.
Art Deco has more decoration than Art Moderne. Art Deco is the style you see in a lot of movie theaters and hotels that were built in the 20s and 30s. It has facades with geometric designs and strips of windows with decorative spandrels. Art Deco uses a lot of straight lines and slender forms. Sleekness is the word that comes to mind. At the time, it was considered modernistic.
But that's what gets confusing. Doesn't modernistic also apply to Art Moderne?
Art Moderne is simpler than Deco. It has things like more rounded corners, flat roofs, and the walls are smooth and don't have any decoration. It's more streamlined than Deco. Art Moderne buildings remind me of boats. The walls are smooth and the trim is usually stainless steel. A lot of the windows are round, kind of like the portholes on a boat.
Oh, I know a building like that. It's right here in town on 2nd Avenue. It has a rounded corner and round windows. It used to be a gas station, but now it's a restaurant. We should go there sometime.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. My favorite building is the Maritime Building. It's downtown right across from my father's office. It's Art Deco, built in 1927. I know that from the cornerstone. You should see the lobby. It's just beautiful. There's a geometric pattern in the tile on the floor, kind of a big circle with lots of triangles. And you should see the elevator doors. They're gorgeous.
You know, we should go around and look at some of these buildings.
Yeah, that would be fun.
And you know what else? This is an idea for our project. We could take pictures of the buildings and do a slideshow in class.
Oh, that's a cool idea. But don't we need to get permission to take photographs, especially of the interior? We need pictures of the lobby of the Maritime Building.
We could ask for permission. That shouldn't be a problem. Let's talk to Professor Vargas and see what he thinks.
Okay. Why don't you do that, and I'll go down to the Maritime Building and see if there's anyone there, like a building superintendent who can give us permission. I'll let you know. Why don't we meet again on Thursday?
Okay, fine with me.
Number 6. What are the students mainly discussing? Number 7. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
Yeah, I like Professor Vargas, but sometimes he goes too fast, and I feel like I'm missing something. There's a lot we have to remember.
True. There are a lot of details about all the different styles.
Yeah, there's Art Nouveau and Art Deco and Art Moderne. I have a hard time keeping it all straight.
Select the sentence that best expresses how the man probably feels. Number 8. How does the woman help the man? Number 9. Indicate whether each sentence below describes Art Deco or Art Moderne. Number 10. What can be inferred from the conversation? Questions 11 through 16. Lecture in a world history class.
For thousands of years, early peoples found their food in nature. They hunted and fished and ate plants and fruits that grew wild. What led these people to invent agriculture, a completely different way of life? We know that ancient people changed from hunters and gatherers to farmers when they began to domesticate wild plants and animals. The first farmers on each continent did not have other farmers to observe, so they could not have chosen farming consciously. However, once agriculture had started in one part of a continent, neighboring people could see the result and make the conscious decision to farm. We have no written records about prehistoric agriculture in the Americas, and very few artifacts or physical clues. We do have evidence that early people used sharp sticks to dig furrows for planting seeds. Those sticks were probably the first agricultural tools. We think the first Americans began to grow crops around 10,000 years ago. The evidence comes from a cave in Mexico, where cultivated squash seeds have been found. These seeds are evidence of the early domestication of plants. Hunting-gathering people selected wild plants for domestication for various reasons. Some plants had tasty fruit. Some had fleshy or seedless fruit, and some had fruit with oily or tasty seeds. In a certain part of prehistoric Mexico, there was a kind of squash that grew in abundance on hillsides. The flesh of this squash was bitter, so the people didn't eat it, but the seeds were tasty and nourishing, and the people liked to gather them. The people brought the squash seeds back to their camp. As they ate the seeds, some seeds fell to the ground all around the camp. Later, some of these seeds germinated and produced new plants. Thus, the hunter-gatherers became farmers sort of by accident. It was probably not a conscious decision to plant squash in their camp, yet that was the result. Now the people had a wild garden of squash plants at their campsite. This was fortunate, so they started to take more of an interest in the plants. They tried to protect the plants in practical ways. They cut back and cleared out the less healthy-looking plants. They pulled up other types of plants that were weeds. They gave the plants water during long dry spells. Eventually, the people realized that seeds grew better when they were planted in earth that was turned over. So they began to scratch the earth with a digging stick and to plant seeds systematically in rows. They realized that a tilled, watered, weeded garden provided larger, better, more numerous squash plants than those that grew naturally on a dry hillside. Thus, with a series of conscious decisions, the people started cultivating a new breed of squash plants. Because of their success with squash, they started to experiment with other kinds of plants. In time, they built a fence around the garden to protect it from animals. At this point, agriculture was firmly established in their culture. Of course, all of this didn't happen overnight. The process probably took thousands of years. Different peoples acquired agriculture at different times in prehistory. In some areas, crops and agricultural technology spread as ancient peoples conquered and traded with one another. In other places, agricultural technology developed in isolation. Even so, it's very likely that the change from a hunting-gathering society to an agricultural society followed a similar pattern in different regions of the world.
Number 11. What is the main purpose of the lecture? Number 12. What is probably true about the origins of agriculture? Number 13. The professor explains how the early people of Mexico probably started farming. Summarize the process by putting the events in order. Number 14. Why did the people begin to use digging sticks? Number 15. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
Because of their success with squash, they started to experiment with other kinds of plants. In time, they built a fence around the garden to protect it from animals. At this point, agriculture was firmly established in their culture. Of course, all of this didn't happen overnight.
Why does the professor say this?
Of course, all of this didn't happen overnight.
Number 16. What point does the professor make about the transition from hunting-gathering to agriculture? Questions 17 through 20 discussion in an ecology class. The class is studying the hydrologic cycle.
Water is essential for life, and in parts of the world, it's a precious commodity. Water continuously circulates from the ocean to the atmosphere to the land and back to the ocean, providing us with a renewable supply of purified water. This complex cycle, known as the hydrologic cycle, balances the amount of water in the ocean, in the atmosphere, and on the land. We get our understanding of how the cycle operates from research in climatology and hydrology. So, who can tell me what climatology is?
It's the study of climate and the causes and effects of different climates. That's
right. And what is hydrology? Sarah?
Well, hydro means water, so it's something to do with water, like the study of water.
Yes, the prefix hydro does refer to water. The hydrologic cycle is the water cycle, and hydrology is the study of the water, the distribution and effect of the water on the Earth's surface and in the soil and layers of rock. Think of climatology as the atmospheric phase and hydrology as the land phase of the water cycle. Climatologists study the role of solar energy in the cycle. They're mainly concerned with the atmospheric phase of the cycle, how solar energy drives the cycle through the processes of evaporation, atmospheric circulation, and precipitation. Water is continuously absorbed into the atmosphere as vapor, evaporation, and returned to the earth as rain, hail, or snow, precipitation. The amount of water evaporating from oceans exceeds precipitation over oceans, and the excess water vapor is moved by wind to the land. The land phase of the cycle is the concern of hydrologists. Hydrologists study the vast quantities of water in the land phase of the cycle, how water moves over and through the land, and how it's stored on or within the earth. Over land surfaces, of the precipitation that falls over land, small amounts evaporate while still in the air and re-enter the atmosphere directly. The rest of it reaches the surface of the land. The water that falls to earth is stored on the surface in lakes, or it penetrates the surface, or it runs off over the surface and flows in rivers to the ocean. Some of the water is stored temporarily in the upper soil layers and used later by trees and plants. When it rains, yes?
I wondered if that makes trees and plants part of the hydrologic cycle. I mean, they take in water and the water moves through them, and then later on, the water evaporates from their leaves.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Justin. Plants do play an important role in the land phase of the cycle and are therefore part of the cycle. Trees and plants circulate and store water. They draw it up through their roots and return it to the atmosphere through their leaves during evapotranspiration. When it rains, if the soil is already saturated, water will seep downward through the upper soil layers and possibly reach the water table. When it reaches the water table, it passes into groundwater storage. Most of the groundwater later returns to the surface, either as springs or as stream flow, supplying water to plants. Eventually, all of the water falling on land makes its way back to the ocean. The movement of water from land to the ocean is called runoff. Runoff and groundwater together balance the amount of water that moves from the ocean to the land. Every molecule of water in the natural system eventually circulates through the hydrologic cycle. Tremendous quantities of water are cycled annually. And, as Justin pointed out, living organisms, plants, and animals as well, are also part of the cycle, since water is a large part of the mass of most organisms. Living organisms store and use water, since water is the solvent for most biological reactions.
Number 17. What is the hydrologic cycle? Number 18. Identify the area in the diagram that mainly concerns climatologists. Number 19. What do hydrologists mainly study? Number 20. What happens to water that falls to the earth as precipitation? Number 21. Why does the professor say this?
Eventually, all of the water falling on land makes its way back to the ocean. The movement of water from land to the ocean is called runoff. Runoff and groundwater together balance the amount of water that moves from the ocean to the land.
Number 22. What can be inferred about plants in the hydrologic cycle? Questions 23 through 28. Lecture in a Canadian Studies class. The professor is talking about art.
The painter Arthur Lismer wrote, "Most creative people, whether in painting, writing, or music, began to have a guilty feeling that Canada was as yet unwritten, unpainted, unsung. According to Lismer, there was a job to be done. And so a generation of artists set out to create a school of painting that would record the Canadian scene and reinforce a distinctive Canadian identity. Calling themselves the Group of Seven, they proclaimed that, quote, art must grow and flower in the land before the country will be a real home for its people. The group's origins date back to the 1911 showing in Toronto of the painting At the Edge of the Maplewood by A.Y. Jackson of Montreal. This painting's vibrant color and texture made a deep impression on local artists. They persuaded Jackson to come to Toronto and share a studio with them. Jackson began to accompany another painter, Tom Thompson, on sketching trips to Algonquin Park, north of the city. Several of the artists worked at the same Toronto commercial design firm, and it was here that they met and discovered their common artistic interests. After work, they socialized together at the Arts and Letters Club. They talked about finding a new direction for Canadian art, a distinctly Canadian style of painting. It was a romantic quest, mainly fueled by the restless spirit of Tom Thompson, who led the others to the Canadian wilderness to sketch and paint. A patron gave the artists the famous studio building in Toronto. It was here that Thompson did some of his finest paintings from sketches made in the wild. Among them was The Jack Pine, one of the nation's best-loved pictures. But then, suddenly and tragically, Thompson died in 1917, drowning in a canoe accident, shocking his fellow painters and Canadian art lovers. The other artists continued their sketching trips to the vast wilderness of northern Ontario. It was there that they found inspiration for some of their greatest paintings. Each artist had his own vision and his own technique, but they all captured the essence of wilderness Canada, a bleak, somber, incredibly beautiful landscape of rock outcroppings, storm-driven lakes, and jack pine trees, a land totally uninhabited by people. After a 1919 trip to the wilderness, the artists decided to organize an exhibition and to formally call themselves the Group of Seven. The 7 founding artists were Jackson, Lismer, Harris, MacDonald, Varley, Johnston, and Carmichael. Their 1920 exhibition was an important moment in Canadian art. It proclaimed that Canadian art must be inspired by Canada itself. However, the initial response was less than favorable. Several major art critics ignored the show, while others called the paintings crude and barbaric. Yet when British critics praised the group's distinctly Canadian vision, the Canadian public took another look. Later exhibitions drew increasing acceptance for the group's work, establishing them as the national school. Before long, they were the most influential painters in the country, and several of their paintings have become icons of Canada. A.Y. Jackson was influential for his analysis of light and shadow. Arthur Lismer's work has an intensity all its own, particularly his painting of the Canadian jungle, the violently colored forest in the fall. Lorraine Harris went further than the rest in simplifying the forms of nature into sculptural shapes, organizing an entire scene into a single unified image, and eventually into abstraction.
Number 23. Which of the following best describes the organization of the lecture? Number 24. What is the professor's point of view concerning the Group of Seven? Number 25. Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
After work, they socialized together at the Arts and Letters Club. They talked about finding a new direction for Canadian art, a distinctly Canadian style of painting. It was a romantic quest, mainly fueled by the restless spirit of Tom Thompson, who led the others to the Canadian wilderness to sketch and paint.
Why does the professor say this?
It was a romantic quest, mainly fueled by the restless spirit of Tom Thompson, who led the others to the Canadian wilderness to sketch and paint.
Number 26. What subjects did the group of 7 paint? Number 27. What does the professor mean by this statement?
Before long, they were the most influential painters in the country, and several of their paintings have become icons of Canada.
Number 28. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
A.Y. Jackson was influential for his analysis of light and shadow. Arthur Lismer's work has an intensity all its own, particularly his painting of the Canadian jungle, the violently colored forest in the fall. Lorraine Harris went further than the rest in simplifying the forms of nature into sculptural shapes, organizing an entire scene into a single unified image, and eventually into abstraction.
What can be concluded about the group of 7's style of painting? Questions 29 through 30, part of a talk in a business management class.
What do we mean when we talk about leadership? First, it's important not to confuse leadership with power. It's true that, by definition, leaders always have some degree of power. Leaders have power because of their ability to influence other people. However, many power holders do not have the qualities of leadership. Consider the head waiter in your favorite restaurant. The head waiter has power to some degree. For example, the power to seat you at the best table by the window. But he doesn't necessarily have the qualities we associate with leadership. We have to distinguish between leaders and power holders. There are a lot of powerful people who lack leadership skills. A military dictator has power. So does the robber who sticks a gun in your face and demands your wallet. Leadership is something else. Leadership and power are not the same thing, although they are similar in this one way. Both leadership and power involve the ability to bring about the results you want and to prevent the results that you don't want to happen. Here's another way to think of it. In sociological terms, power is simply the ability to bring about certain behavior in other people. For example, parents have power over their children, and they use it to get their children to behave in acceptable ways. Teachers have power, and so do mid-level managers, all as a result of their position. Where does power come from? The sources are varied. Probably the oldest source of power is the ability to use physical force, a source available to both the military and the biggest kid on the playground. The power that comes from physical might is not the same as leadership. Just think of the military dictator or the school bully. We don't usually think of these power holders as leaders, despite the brute force they use to control others. Wealth, position, the ability to motivate, all of these are sources of power. Being close to others with power is a source of power. That's why people gravitate toward political leaders. Some power comes from qualities people were born with, like physical beauty or the ability to influence friends. Science and technology are also sources of power. Corporations understand this and spend huge amounts of money on research, information systems, and consultants. Although leadership and power are different things, they're related in important ways. Consider, for example, a chief executive officer who has the ability to motivate people, a CEO with vision who can lift the spirit of his or her employees and bring about a rise in productivity. That is leadership. But consider this scenario. The company realizes they're sort of falling behind in the technology race, So the CEO responds by increasing the amount of money available to the company's research division. That is the exercise of power. Authorizing a spending increase could have been made only by a chief executive with the power to do so. Remember, both leadership and power involve the ability to accomplish the results you want, and successful managers understand how the two work together to make this happen.
Number 29. What is the talk mainly about? Number 30. Why does the professor talk about the head waiter in a restaurant? Number 31. Why does the professor say this?
A military dictator has power. So does the robber who sticks a gun in your face and demands your wallet. Leadership is something else.
Number 32. According to the professor, how are leadership and power similar? Number 33. According to the professor, which of the following are sources of power? Number 34. Listen again to part of the talk. Then answer the question.
Authorizing a spending increase could have been made only by a chief executive with the power to do so. Remember, both leadership and power involve the ability to accomplish the results you want, and successful managers understand how the two work together to make this happen.
What does the professor imply about successful managers? Speaking section Speaking section measures your ability to speak in English about a variety of topics. There are 6 questions in this section. Record your response to each question on a cassette. Questions 1 and 2 are independent speaking tasks in which you will speak about familiar topics. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently about the topics. Questions 3 and 4 are integrated tasks in which you will read a passage, listen to a conversation or lecture, and then speak in response to a question about what you have read and heard. You will need to combine relevant information from the 2 sources to answer the question completely. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently, and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you read and heard. Questions 5 and 6 are integrated tasks in which you will listen to part of a conversation or lecture and then speak in response to a question about what you have heard. Your responses will be scored on your ability to speak clearly and coherently, and on your ability to accurately convey information about what you heard. You will hear each conversation and lecture only one time. You may take notes while you listen. You may use your notes to help you answer the questions. What foreign country would you like to, and explain why you would like to go there? Include details and examples to support your explanation. In some schools, teachers take. Other schools allow students to select their own classes. Which system do you think is better, and why? Include details and examples in your explanation. Now listen to two students as...
What do you think about the new pool hours?
It doesn't affect me much, since I only swim on weekends, and those times aren't changing. What about you?
Well, it's kind of a big change to the pool schedule. They're completely eliminating times in the late afternoon, after 3 o'clock. That's when I like to swim, right after my last class.
It looks like they're adding more swimming classes in the afternoon and evening.
Yeah, but I don't see why they have to close the pool to everyone else. A class doesn't usually take up the whole pool. I don't see why they can't leave half of the pool open for people who just want to swim laps. It's not fair to just take away our pool time like this. The least they could do is extend the morning hours. They should open the pool at 7 instead of 9 in the morning. That would make up for the time they cut in the afternoon.
You would go swimming...
Afternoon.
You would go swimming at 7 o'clock in the morning?
Sure. I'm a morning person, and what a way to start the day.
The man expresses his opinion about the change in swimming pool hours. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. Now listen to part of a talk in abundance.
Recently in the clinic, we had a patient who had been suffering from tremors of the head that caused headaches. These headaches left her neck stiff and her back sore. In addition, her jaw clicked when she opened and closed her mouth. Sometimes her jaw locked up while she was eating and she couldn't even open her mouth. Doctors had been treating her symptoms with pain-killing medication for 20 years with little success. The patient felt very frustrated and was willing to try anything to relieve her head, neck, and jaw problems. Finally, we referred her to the chiropractic clinic. After her third visit to the chiropractor, the patient noticed a huge difference. Her headaches and lockjaw were gone, and the head tremors greatly reduced. She was able to stop taking painkillers. Patient success stories like this one are a big reason why chiropractic is becoming more accepted in the medical establishment. Research findings are also helping to increase acceptance. In a survey of doctors taken 2 years ago, for example, 62% of the physicians said that chiropractic treatment helped their patients.
Describe the patient's symptoms and explain why chiropractic treatment was recommended. Explain how this patient's experience supports the practice of chiropractic. Now listen to a conversation between...
So have you registered for the next semester yet?
Not yet. I want to take statistics, but the course is already full, so it looks like I have to take a different math course, like maybe calculus. But I'd much rather take statistics.
If you want statistics, why don't you register to get on the waiting list? Then if someone drops it, you might get in.
Do you think so? I didn't think of that.
You could register for both courses, get on the waiting list for statistics, and also register for calculus. That way you'll be sure to get one of the classes. If you get in statistics, you can drop calculus.
I guess I could try that.
Another thing you could do is talk to the instructor that teaches statistics. If you can convince the instructor that you really want the class, maybe they'll let you in anyway, even though the class is full. It's worth a try. It's worth a try.
The students discuss 2 possible solutions to the woman's problem. Describe the problem. Then state which of the 2 solutions you prefer and explain why. Now listen to part of a lecture in Assessor is discussing children's fears.
All children experience periods of fear. Fears are normal, and they help children solve issues of change and development. Fears also call parents' attention to a child's situation so the parent will provide extra support when the child needs it. The fear of falling is built into each newborn baby in the form of a clasping motion. A baby will make this motion when he's uncovered or surprised, or when he's dropped suddenly. His arms shoot out sideways and then come together as if to grab anything or anyone nearby. The baby usually cries out when he makes this motion. The startled cry attracts a parent's attention. Thus, even from birth, a baby is able to use this natural fear of falling to get help. Another fear that babies have is the fear of strangers, a natural fear that alerts the child to a new situation. Anxiety around strangers is one of the earliest signs of fear in babies. In studies that filmed babies as they played with adults, it was shown that even at 1 month old, the babies could distinguish between their mother, father, and strangers, and they showed this with clear differences in their own responses. Fears appear during periods of new and rapid learning. At 1 year old and all through the second year, a whole new world opens up when children learn to walk. They will both value and fear their new independence. At the same time, they learn to run away from their parents. Children also find new things to be afraid of: dogs, loud noises, strange people and places. Fears help children adjust to their new independence. By overcoming their fears, children acquire confidence in their own new abilities.
Using points and examples from the lecture, describe fears that young children experience, and explain how these fears help children. Writing section directions measures your ability to use writing to communicate in an academic environment. There are 2 writing questions. Question 1 is an integrated writing task. You will read a passage, listen to a lecture, and then answer a question based on what you have read and heard. You have 20 minutes to plan and write your response. Question 2 is an independent writing task. You will answer a question based on your own knowledge and experience. You have 30 minutes to plan and write your response. Now listen to part of a talk on this.
Nothing is more dependable than the lowly earthworm, right? Well, not exactly. We now know that earthworms are causing significant damage to some forests. The problem is they're destroying the soil cover. Native plant communities are disappearing, and so is the habitat for a lot of different animals. It's because earthworms change the structure of the soil and change how nutrients are cycled. It's because of this that they have such a huge rippling effect on forest ecosystems. The idea that worms are suddenly a problem isn't easy for us to grasp, but now we have evidence of their damage. There's a forest ecologist in Minnesota who's studying the soil near a popular fishing lake. She noticed that the forest floor was changing rapidly near the shoreline of the lake, where fishers dump their unused bait worms. A thick layer of spongy duff was disappearing, and so were the native wildflowers. When she took a shovel and looked at the soil, she could see that earthworms were present in large numbers wherever the duff was disappearing. The worms are doing just what gardeners like them to do. They're taking organic matter from the surface, in this case, the leaf litter and decaying branches, and they're moving it down deeper into the soil. Except that here, by the lakeshore, they're cleaning the forest floor so well that fallen leaves disappear in just a few weeks. The decaying leaves in the duff are of vital importance to the forest ecosystem. Duff contains the nutrients that are slowly released into the soil, the nutrients that plants need to sprout. But worms are literally eating the forest floor right out from under the plants. And the disappearance of the duff has an effect beyond the native plants. The duff also gives shelter to salamanders, insects, and spiders. So when the duff disappears, so do these animals and the other animals that feed on them.
Describe the problems caused by earthworms in forest ecosystems and explain how these problems contradict information in the reading.